as someone who doesn't play Yu-Gi-Oh! Duel Links, there's a good amount of transparency here on their Forbidden Limited list that I'm kind of envious of. I wish that we had descriptions on all of our Forbidden Limited changes, and that has happened in the past. So this tweet here got retweeted by Fifth Rate Duelist, and she sort of made the point, hey, why doesn't Konami explain our TCG ban list like this? Well, they did once, and I went ahead and linked to that, and this got quite a few replies, and a few people retweeted it as well. So this article is all the way back from 2012, the Dark Ages, right? This was sort of the end of the the like weirdest like plant synchro era we had ever had. Well, really the last one we had. It was the sort of the culmination of everything that had been built up to throughout the synchro era. The 5Ds era had ended just the previous year. This was the beginning of the Xyz era, and we were starting to see that come through with decks like Windups, and soon Inzectors would be released. We already had Rescue Rabbit running around, but a lot of what was on this list, and we can look at some of the changes here, was about attacking the previous set of really good decks. So, right, the Plant Synchro deck with Glow Bulb, Spore, Reborn Tengu, let's see, I think that was pretty much it for the most part. These cards were all being restricted. Oh, of course, Trishula, right? These cards were all being restricted to sort of rein in the power of synchros against Xyz monsters, because at the time, there was sort of a debate about, well, why would I really play Xyz monsters when synchros are just so much better? And you got to remember that at the time, generic Xyz monsters were things like Utopia. Not exactly like pack sellers, right? They weren't destroying your opponent's field or banishing their hand or negating cards, with basically the exception of the All-Star Xyz monsters that the Rescue Rabbit deck was playing. So this list, like I said, it was a lot about taking out the old guard and allowing the new decks to really dominate, which is, of course, immediately what happened, right? It was Chaos Dragons, it was Inzectors, it was Windups, and, you know, later on in the year, it was a little bit of Erratics, not a whole bunch. But we can see in here that there was also hits to TG. TG has actually won the YCS right before this list. And there's a comment in this article, and we'll get to that in a minute, about how this list was actually designed and finalized before that deck topped. So if you ever wonder if Konami takes YCS results into consideration when building a Forbidden Limited list, they do, but it's not always every single YCS, because these things do have to be built at a certain point, right? So just because a deck tops right at the tail end of a format doesn't mean that it's going to be hit. Conversely, it means there's a very good chance that they already know that that deck is overpowered by the time it tops, which, who knows how good these guys are at Konami's R&D. Like, we like to imagine they have no idea what they're doing when they create their Forbidden Limited list, but that was a pretty sneaky hit, right? They kind of already knew that TG was a good deck before the community broadly knew that. Also, there was a hit here to the Agent of Mystery Earth, right? The idea of like this deck being good seems so far-fetched now. I mean, even TG to an extent, but especially Agents. And there was also a Trap Dust Shoot went on the Forbidden Lists here. But let's go and backtrack to the thoughts on the March 1st, 2012 Forbidden Limited list, right? So this article was written by Kevin Tour, Konami employee. I don't think he works there anymore, but he was always very opinionated. You'd catch him sometimes on the forums. Not these days. You don't see that kind of transparency from Konami employees. They do not talk about their jobs on social media. It really just doesn't happen. So this article is very strange. And you have to remember, this is at a time when the TCG and the OCG shared the same Forbidden Limited list. So what he's describing here aren't just decisions that are made by the TCG unilaterally. They're actually made by both the TCG and the OCG. And I would imagine, this is speculation on my part, I would imagine a lot of that's driven by the OCG side. So he goes on to talk about a couple of different things here, like why do we have a list? I think we all understand why there needs to be forbidden cards in this game. But this section's really interesting. He talks about these 4 points where these are things they're trying to avoid by creating a forbidden and limited list, right? The first point is to prevent a situation where you feel locked in, you have to play a certain deck, right? This is forbidden and limited list 101, right? The idea that you don't just want one deck or one set of cards that dominate everything else. Pretty easy, we understand, right? And the second point is kind of like, just creating a whole bunch of different decks to play, which I think they've done a pretty decent job of in recent times. A couple of exceptions here and there. Then there's this third point: restrict solitaire play decks, and this is how he describes solitaire play. These are usually first-turn combo decks where one duelist plays by themselves for 15 minutes, shuffling and summoning cards while their opponent twiddles his thumbs. Now, back in the day of 2012, these combos did exist. Plant Synchro was really good at doing exactly that. Those combos are nowhere near as convoluted as the combos we have today. They're just not even comparable. And every deck does these things. So this point right here was clearly thrown out at some point. Now, maybe that's because they did market research and they found out that players were willing to deal with their opponents doing 15-minute turns if it meant that they also got those 15-minute turns, right? I think players like the big combo decks, right? There's certainly a kind of player who is a big fan of them. But at the time, they were trying to stop them, right? And there was definitely a sense of the decks that were coming out of this Forbidden Limitless were not huge combo strategies outside of the wind-up loop, perhaps. They had a few, you'd play a few combos, a few special summons, but nothing crazy, nothing like Plant Synchro existed for a while. And then finally we have this: eliminating cards that are confusing, cause games to stall out, create infinite loops, right? The cards that make tournaments unpleasant. I think we can probably name a few cards that make tournaments and interfere with rulings and just extend tournaments out forever. Mystic Mind being one of them. Anyways, so he goes on to explain the individual hits, right? Talks about Trap Dust Shoot being a card that was either too good on turn one or not useful later on. It was a negative play experience either way, so it had to go. This one's interesting. You see this sometimes where a card will come out and it'll be so good when you draw it at the right time that it completely blows out a duel. And I've tried to sort of draw attention to this fact that there are cards in this game that they're just too good in the moment. Maybe they're useless 90% of the time, but in the 10% that they're really good, it's just a complete blowout, and it doesn't feel like a fair duel at that point. To some extent, cards like Evenly Matched and Nibiru can feel that way, but I think there are better examples where, for example, cards like Soul Charge were definitely too good in the moment. Spore and Glow Bulb, these cards, Glow Bulb came off the list and then it went right back on thanks to a certain Link monster. I think if you got rid of that Link monster, you could probably bring Glow Bulb back, but Spore being back in the game is not a problem at all because the plant engine just isn't what it used to be. But he describes why these cards are hit, right? Tuners are okay, that's obvious, right? Tuners that can be used for any synchro monster are okay. Cards that can easily summon, cards that you can easily search for or summon from the deck are okay. Reusable cards are okay. Reusable cards with no cost are even okay. Synchro monsters with powerful effects are okay. Synchro monsters that can be summoned using any synchro materials are okay. But here's the catch, right? These cards in the synchro pool that they were using, and also the materials that they were using, kind of did all of these things. What's interesting is that in today's game, what do we have? Reusable, no cost monsters that can be summoned from the deck or searched very easily, very little restrictions, just all of these things, right, come together on so many different cards in this game. It's quite insane. And you don't see it as much with tuners anymore, but we definitely see it with a lot of extenders that exist in the game. So I feel like a lot of this has been abandoned. Lumina, it talks about Lumina as far as the Lightsworns, that they had their peak and this was sort of bringing back Lumina to give that deck a small boost, which is fine. And I think like an explanation like this is cool. Like it gives you a historical perspective on why the card was restricted and why it's coming back. Like the deck just doesn't win anymore. It's too slow. Smoke Signal, again, another reason to... I mean, when this deck came out, the Six Samurai deck, was insane. Absolutely busted. And again, giving you a perspective, hey, look, the deck isn't really winning anymore. Let's bring some of these consistency cards back. And we can say the same thing with Torrential Tribute. It talks about Striker and Earth being really, really good, and he also does mention that it had won YCS Atlanta, a sign of what might have come. I think this is a pretty good hit, right? This is a hit ahead of time, actually. Yes, the list came out after the YCS was finished, but the list was finalized before the YCS concluded. So a really smart pick on Konami's side. All of these decisions that are in here, look, I know that they get roasted for a lot of them, and we can certainly look back historically and talk about like how they abandoned some of these principles. And also, there's some things to attack them for here. I think that's fair, to criticize for, not to attack. But there's a reason why these articles don't get published. There's a reason why they don't come out and defend their decisions. Part of it is because, well, a lot of the hits are driven by more cynical reasons other than just pure game balance. They're restricted because it's time to push the new product, right? This is where Konami releases a very, very powerful card for a deck and goes, oops, we made the deck too powerful. We're going to restrict not the new card that we added that's really powerful and push it over the edge, but a bunch of the older cards. So if you want to play this deck, you're still going to need to get the most powerful card. In fact, if you were holding off on getting it, too bad, we just restricted half your deck. You're definitely going to have to get it now. And we're going to just let this extremely powerful card run around, and the deck will still be really good, and then maybe down the line we'll restrict that powerful card, but then probably not give you back the cards that we restricted in the first place to balance out that powerful card. This is the Pendulum Magician experience, right? Those decisions are cynical. They're done with money in mind. Konami does not want to come out and have to defend those decisions, and they don't want to have to come up with some random explanation as to why they were doing that when the better like the explanation we already know is right in front of us and staring us in the face. But even for those reasons that are done out of the goodness of their heart, like out of a perspective of let's actually balance the game, you're going to have a lot of debate over whether those were the right choices. Every game goes through this, and if you can get away with not doing it, then don't do it, right? I don't know why Konami, as far as the physical TCG goes, is like the only runners of a game that can get away with just pushing balance patches and just being like, whatever, like, take your guess. I mean, the whole reason that we have all these videos reacting to the list and interpreting them and giving our thoughts is because they don't give us anything to go on. Like, sometimes cards get restricted and we just don't know why. Like, we have to guess. Like, maybe it was this reason, maybe it was this reason. If they just told us, it wouldn't be so bad. So that's what I have to show you. Of course, if you want to see this article, it is on the Yu-Gi-Oh blog.konami.com. If you just look this up, this title, you'll find it as well on Google. There was a part 2, I believe. I don't have it up right now. But it's really interesting to read and get some perspective on... Yeah, I think he was talking about cards that didn't have their status changed. Oh, there is a part 2 right here. Yeah, so he talks about cards that did not get their status changed. Rescue Rabbit, right? Book of Moon, Bestiary. I mean, Rescue Rabbit, like, again, this is an example of a card that had just released, was doing very, very well in the format, but was not being restricted because it had just come out, right? There's sort of this explanation here of, well, we want to give it some more time in the format. Like, this card was obviously busted from the beginning. They knew it. They made it a secret rare. They knew it was going to be excellent. But there was still packs to sell, right? So this is a little bit more cynical than some of the other hits or some of the other topics. But yeah, so if you want to check that out, please do. I think this is a really good piece of Yu-Gi-Oh history. I didn't realize that more people didn't know about it, so definitely go look that up and give it a full read when you have the time. I think it's very much worth it. And honestly, if I had my way, they would publish these every single time they do these balance updates for our game. Right? Whenever they publish a Forbidden Limited list, I would love to see reasoning as to why they're doing these things. Will we ever see that? I don't know. But anyways, thank you for listening and watching. And until next time, then.